Far from the inner sphere, in the depths of clan space, in the aftermath of the Pentagon Wars, and the explosion of technology that began to take place in the new supposed paradise crafted in the mind's eye of Nicholas Kerensky, a multitude of war machines from humanity's golden era were reimagined in the early days of this great leap forward. But what weapons of war were to be those elevated in this sense to a new, higher standard? The machines most beloved by those who brought them from the inner sphere itself, of course. Of the vanguard of these new, second-generation battle mechs, it was clans Staradder and Wolf that pioneered through this fresh pathway of development. In the case of the Staradders, they reimagined the Warhammer into a monster few could have ever hoped to contend with, warping an already incredible saber into the deadliest of blades in the form of the Warhammer IIC. But another mech emerged just prior to this brutal behemoth, and it is one that would be the face of clan combat throughout the era prior to the arrival of the Omnimech. Birthed in the forges of Stronamecti, this mech was fathered by the very clan that made it their home, and they are the ones who also possess the very blood of Kerensky coursing through their veins. As with later designs like the Timberwolf, it was always to be the clan of Destiny that would bring forwards the deadliest and most recognizable tools for the clans to bring to war. Even the ever-competent and adept Staradders and their devastating Warhammer IIC could not overcome the sinister monster that those within Clan Wolf brought into the world. And how could it be any different? Modeled on one of the most recognizable and feared battlemechs in the entire inventory of the Star League and the Great Houses, it was only logical that this would end up being the biggest breakout battlemech of its age. It also, of course, borrows from the very same pool of mechs that the Warhammer hails from, in that it is based on a platform which gunslinger pilots were famous for. So without any further delay, let us begin our journey of discovery, observing the history and origins of one of the deadliest battlemechs ever designed, as well as the story of the ones who crafted it and maintained it throughout the ages. Built originally with the cunning and viciousness of a wolf, in the future it would find its home in many clans and armies outside of where it originated. But regardless, it will always remain at the front of the pack wherever it goes. Given all of the factors behind its creation, this is simply expected, as it not only has the legacy of its creators, but also the legacy of its mighty predecessor as well. The Marauder IIC. From Kerensky's stars came the 800, beneath a banner of truth and righteous light, to lift up those who had suffered and to smite down, with fearful vengeance, those who had ruled. In the name of vanity or greed, the thunder of their battlemech's feet, the lightning from their weapons, the blood spilled in their name, created the clan spirit, the forge upon which we have fashioned ourselves to be the weapon of the resurrected Star League, honed to a razor's edge by the trials, by the remembrance, and by the words of the great Kerenskis, our sires, our saviors. The Remembrance, passage 98, verse 24, lines 8 through 20. Our journey, our odyssey, begins long ago, and in its beginning, let us describe the world that made this story possible. The collapse of the Star League in the wake of its brutal civil war, and the exodus of its most loyal adherents and defenders in the aftermath, was one of the most significant developments in the long, winding story of human history. This single event took the great legions of the SLDF out of the equation, for the most part, from the tragic and catastrophic events that were to follow in the wake of the destruction of the Terran hegemony, Homeworlds Republic, and the Star League itself. The Succession Wars, or the Forever Wars, as General Alexander Kerensky had predicted them prior to his and his followers' departure from the birthplace and broad homes of mankind, were waged at a scale of destruction and bloodshed not seen in the entire history of humanity up until that point. The departure of these soldiers, their families, a mass of Star League specialists and civilians escaping the fate of the Inner Sphere also created the conditions for some of the most dramatic changes in warfare from that point forwards. Just no one knew it at the time. For you see, Kerensky and his disciples were not free from the conflict they sought to escape. Not truly. They too would fall down the path of self-destruction as their own actors turned in on themselves, and as the problems of the old world followed them into the darkness. And this said nothing of the ambitions of those molded by the violence of the Star League Civil War either. In 2785, there was the notable mutiny of the Prinz Eugen and several other vessels, and the long journey into the darkness of the deep periphery. The officers on board these rebellious warships, after months and months of travel deeper and deeper into the void in crammed conditions and seemingly with no end point on their journey in sight, opted to try to turn back towards the Inner Sphere. Kerensky and his loyal forces attacked and crushed the mutineers viciously, further grounding the remnants of the flotilla with a degree of fanaticism, at least amongst those who were most dedicated to the project at hand. Those officers who led the mutiny and were considered ringleaders were executed for treason. The irony, of course, is that they were executed for treason against a state that no longer existed. General Brasso was a good man, but he was always too concerned for his men. He let that cloud his judgment. He also chose his allies poorly. Admiral Vatuk has had issues with the General and de Chevalier for years. Why he chose to come along, I don't think anyone will ever know. Now, we never will. Still, I'm not sure there wasn't something else behind this. Something had to trigger it. Something bigger than Andri's misstep. Nicholas knows something. Something even his father doesn't. He's beginning to mature, but I think the palace intrigues will consume him if he's not careful. Colonel Absalom Truscott. Personal Journals, 30th of September, 2785. The tragic event itself had been stoked principally by none other than the General's son, Nicholas Kerensky, the future founder of the clans, who had hoped to use the event to further harden the travelers on their odyssey to their new home. Unfortunately for mankind, this did indeed succeed, at least amongst those people who would be most susceptible to his manipulations as well as his hyper-militant and depraved ideology. In other words, the trial of the Star League Defense Forces in exile had only yet begun. And his bloodletting did more than one could have imagined amongst others as well, as it helped further stoke disloyalty and disunity in the long run, only further feeding into the events that would spark the end of the coherent leadership that General Alexander Kerensky left the Inner Sphere with. The fleet did find ground eventually, and this came in the shape of the Pentagon Worlds. These planets were settled in quick order, despite their shortcomings in habitability, but the long journey, stressed colonists, broken soldiers of the SLDF who suffered decades of brutal warfare, and now a perilous venture to get here, all began to fall apart. And fast. Reforms to turn soldiers into lower-ranking laborers and farmers were far from popular, and this said nothing of the now looming, age-old hatred that began to bubble up between former members of the great houses and periphery members of the SLDF. These people made up the vast majority of those who were now a part of the colonial project. Sadly, a large portion of these people increasingly began scapegoating one another, or worse, in their increasingly isolated cultural enclaves across the newly settled worlds of the Pentagon. It was inevitable. It is absolutely impossible to erase centuries of cultural conflict without also eliminating those cultures totally and without remorse. We knew that we would eventually have to deal with this. Problem is, we let optimism blind us. Now we have to act, and hope that it's not too late. We must act decisively, and with overwhelming force if we are to preserve what we have built here, and we must not allow compassion to obscure us from the path we must take. Now I have to make Alex understand this. General Aaron de Chevalier, Personal Diary, 3rd of December, 2800. Riots broke out across the Pentagon Worlds in 2800, and the authorities were paralyzed in response. This then escalated as the new society Alexander Kerensky had hoped for began falling apart. By 2801, the colonies and cities that were established on these new worlds balkanized as the SLDF dissolved into national coalitions, fully reflecting the nation-states they descended from in the first place. Not long after, the infamous de Chevalier massacre took place. I was in the command tent. I've seen death firsthand. I've watched close friends cut down right in front of me, and I've felt the blood of my own soldiers caked on my hands and face. Nothing could have prepared any of us for that loss, though. De Chevalier was the rock upon which this whole thing was built. He was unflappable and indestructible. He was. Now he's no more. General Kerensky, I think, took it the hardest. We all know he took his wife's death hard, but this, his closest friend in the universe, a man closer than a brother, and to be able to do nothing about it. De Chevalier was always there for him, always able to carry the day when things got away from the general, and this time the general wasn't there. What's more, he ordered him into battle. It was as if suddenly the entire weight of the universe was thrust upon his shoulders. Only this time, he wasn't able to stand strong, not without de Chevalier to take the burden from him. The reaction of the general's sons are the polar opposites, and did nothing to ease the pain their father was experiencing. Nicholas didn't say a word, not even after the general gave orders to end the resistance at all costs. If I didn't know better, I'd have almost thought that I saw a smile on his lips. An excerpt from Major General Absalon Truscott's personal journals. 15th of May, 2801. This calamity broke Alexander Kerensky, who constantly had denounced the home that they'd left for the new world that they were intending to build, one without the arrogance and cruelty of the great houses. He died at the age of 100 after the demise of his best friend and confidant, Aaron de Chavier. But Kerensky, in his own death, deliberately handed authority and his approval over to the creature that was his eldest son, Nicholas Kerensky. While he chose to do so after Nicholas displayed clear signs of personality disorders, manipulation, messianic narcissism, and a cruel survival of the fittest ideology, one can only speculate. But in doing so, he perhaps doomed his people to something worse than civil war amongst the stars. General Kerensky is dead. All stations stand by for supplemental orders. SLDF notice, 11th of June, 2801. The generals of the various Star League divisions turned to becoming warlords as they picked sides and descended upon one another. Only one high-ranking SLDF general and his forces remained on side with Nicholas, and that was Absalom Truscott, a man who was truthfully almost a brother to Kerensky's children in all but name. Truscott, too, knew of Nicholas's ideas, but saw him evidently as the only path towards something approaching stability. It is from his support that the ultimate vision of Kerensky's mad successor was even possible. With what forces Nicholas could pull together using the last vestiges of his father's authority, he then prepared those pledged to him for a second exodus, one to pull his armies away from the failures of the Pentagon worlds in order to rebuild his strength, and in order to indoctrinate his followers into the new society he'd envisioned for them and the rest of mankind. It was to be a society that discarded things such as family, religion, or the desire for such things as money. It would create a new template for what humanity would be, even if it meant stripping people of their most basic wants. Today, we'll leave behind everything we've known and everyone we've loved. Again. Once more the greed of the House Lords has infected the Star League and threatened to rip it apart, and with it, the ideals we have pledged ourselves to. We cannot allow that to happen again, but to ensure our continued survival, we must take drastic actions. The days ahead will not be easy, nor will the sacrifices to be endured, but I promise the rewards will be greater than any of us can imagine. Major General Nicholas Kerensky, in a message to his fleet, 12th of February, 2802. What would come to be known as the Kerensky Cluster was already being colonized by forward engineers and civilians from the SLDF flotilla, and this region of space had been spared from the vicious infighting of the Pentagon worlds for the most part. Nicholas Kerensky, with this knowledge already, opted to relocate his followers to this much calmer and more prosperous region, making it the new base of his operations, and the home of his grand social experiments. By the end of May 2802, the second exodus arrived in the Strana system. The inhabitants of the system were minimally able to resist anything the massed army of Kerensky demanded, even as an awkward peace was enforced between the sides as Nicholas let his tendrils slip into the planet. He designed a new capital, named for his mother, which was ironic given his opinion on the concept behind family, or even parenthood. All the same, buildings went up, enclaves were constructed, and the local population of the planet was slowly but surely absorbed into Kerensky's dream of a new world. Events and conspiracies were enacted to make this a reality whenever needed as well. And one of the main things Kerensky did was slim down the SLDF that followed him. He had no need for the massed armies of old, because he intended to forge a new, honor-based warrior society around him, one where only the strongest and most capable warriors survived and thrived. He further broke down the civilians who were left, many of whom were now ex-soldiers, into their castes. In total, his society called for 5 of them. It was to have warriors, laborers, technicians, merchants, and scientists. It is time to set the past behind and move into a future that will allow us to rekindle the bright flame of the Star League's golden age. 800 warriors. They shall be my clans. 20 clans to represent the 20 colonized worlds of the Kerensky cluster. The future belongs to all of us. We shall share in the bright dream that is to come. As we all work to a common future, we shall look forward, knowing that we are ready and willing to do what we must to create a new society, to seize the day. Nicholas Kerensky, addressing the Kerensky cluster, 11th of June, 2807. Nicholas believed that things such as the Pentagon Wars, or even rebellions, could be done away with by annihilating any pre-existing cultures from the inner sphere. And time would prove him, sadly, correct. Not only would the Pentagon worlds wear themselves down by infighting in their absence, but all the people of the clan Homeworlds would be culturally absorbed into the new system he was building. One which rejected everything that was to be of the inner sphere. His clan warriors would be the head of the society, and with time would be born through a eugenics program that disposed of the need of parents. This created what the clans would come to call true-born warriors. It was these very clans that eventually tore through the Pentagon, crushing the rebels who had taken up arms against Alexander Kerensky and his order. And they restored the new order, and that was rectified. It was these clans that then went on to destroy the cultures of all of the peoples across the Kerensky cluster and Pentagon worlds. And it was these clans that tested themselves in battle against one another through trials, in order to see who was the most deserving of what resources, in the controlled, ritualized warfare that Kerensky had envisioned. And one clan stood out from all the others. One clan was so prominent, even to Kerensky, that it became the clan he himself would officially become a part of, and its destiny was to become the fabled Ilclan, the first amongst the clans. When founded originally, the heads of this clan of Destiny, as first selected by the Ilkhan Nicholas Kerensky, were one's Jerome Winson, who was Khan, and one Elise Fet Ladral, who was Sakan. Jerome Winson in particular had an exemplar military career prior to the arrival in the Kerensky cluster and Pentagon worlds. A Lyran-born soldier within the SLDF, and one who was recognized for his talents early on. He was fast-tracked up the chain of command, eventually reaching the rank of Major by the early 2780s, and acquiring a post in Alexander Kerensky's staff. It's notable that Winson was also a remarkable mech ace, famously piloting the notorious and deadly Marauder IIR during the Star League Civil War, to incredible effect. In the aftermath of the bloody conflict, he remained so loyal to the cause of Alexander Kerensky that he was willing to leave his wife behind in the Inner Sphere, who had opted not to join the Exodus. He left everything he knew behind in order to follow what he felt was his moral calling. Jerome himself also fulfilled a similar personal role to Nicholas Kerensky in that he became almost an adopted older brother, much like the founder of Clan Staradder, Absalom Truscott. Unfortunately for Jerome, he was utterly enthralled by Nicholas's power of personality, and often allowed the father of the clans to sway or mold his thoughts and opinions with minimal effort on behalf of the Ilclan. His sister, Jennifer, also eventually became the secret wife to Nicholas as well. This pair served their master to an exceptional degree, propelling his causes and agendas, even when not prompted to do so. So instrumental was Jerome, as well as his sister, in the formation of the clans and the rise of Nicholas Kerensky, and the fact that his forces were made ready first after the founder's radical reforms, that his clan was given the honor of being named for the Mechty Wolf. The Winsons were forever interlocked with the Kerenskys from this time forward, especially once Nicholas joined Clan Wolf himself, and combined his DNA to the gene banks and blood names of the clan in question. Beyond simply being a sycophant and servant for the father of the clans, however, Jerome is noted for his ability to take up the vision of his teacher, as he would be forced to do later in life, becoming the torchbearer for the clans as a whole. It was his hands and his thoughts that crafted the Wolves into the most significant clan in the entire history of the ideology and organizations. What he crafted was something which resembled a balance of many of Kerensky's desires for the clans. These were considered less polished and less perfect at fighting than clans such as Steel Viper or Jade Falcon, at least in terms of their rigid discipline. They also lacked the naked, vicious aggression of Clan Smoke Jaguar as well. In contrast to their peers, they instead occupied a middle road of an approach in most respects. Their demeanor also made them willing to play political games, but not so much as the doomed clans Mongoose and Widowmaker, where later on both would stray too far from the path of the clans, which would lead to both of their destructions. Clan Wolf instead is renowned for stalking their prey, and also for their patience. The wolves could make plans and plays months, years, or even decades in advance. This is remarkable in comparison to many of their more hot-headed or impatient counterparts. They were the total package. To summarize all of this, not only were they the most versatile on the battlefield, offering a balanced approach to warfare and trials that their more dedicated clan rivals couldn't match, they also played politics superbly and to their advantage, often outmaneuvering those who appeared to be in a superior position to them in the clan council with grace and skill. Within the clans themselves, they seemed only matched in tone and demeanor by Kerensky's other adoptive brother's clan, the Staradders, and even they lacked the full list of attributes that the Wolves did. In the aftermath of Operation Klondike, the conquest of the Pentagon Worlds, after Nicholas attached his own bloodline to the clan, it was the Wolves who were selected to put down and crush Clan Wolverine, showing just how trusted and important they were in the framework of Nicholas's clans. They were all but chosen in many senses to be his heralds with everything he'd entrusted them with. And it was from within the halls of this clan, it was from within their technician and scientist caste, that the very first true second-generation clan Battletech was born. Battletech advancement within the clans themselves in those early years followed an interesting evolutionary track. Though often undocumented by the clans, or downplayed at the very least, Clan Wolverine contributed significantly in the realms of weapons development, but also in the introduction of new, cutting-edge designs prior to the Golden Century, such as the Pulverizer, a mech noted for its usage by the last Khan of Clan Wolverine, before their clan's functional destruction. However, by contrast, most of the clans continued to use Star League-era designs for the most part, with a heavy preference to, unironically, the most beloved mechs of the great duelists of the Gunslinger program. Mechs such as the Marauder and Warhammer were a preference for many. Of course, this was always in their more advanced forms from the latter eras of the Star League, typically. And there were a host of other beloved mechs as well. But as with the aces of old, these war machines stood out by contrast, and their advancement, along with other machines, became a focus for many, especially as more and more leaps were made technologically. In the aftermath of the destruction of the aforementioned Wolverines, and the proliferation of their scientific discoveries, as well as major breakthroughs made by other clans, or through just simply imagining what was possible with the new information they now had to hand, the collective clan's research and design systems advanced in remarkable ways. In 2827, in some of the final years of the clans settling their affairs and truly establishing themselves, the Marauder was given a hybridized clan tech refit within the Homeworlds. Terrifying and accurate weaponry like clan large pulse lasers were installed, though this hybrid was hindered by certain old technologies, such as its original medium lasers. On Stranomechti, though, something much more ambitious was brewing. With the new technologies made available to them, and with a desire to improve upon already existing designs of clan battlemechs, Clan Wolf, whose Khan was a rather famous Marauder ace, opted to do something which had yet to be done elsewhere. They opted to not refit an older mech, nor did they opt to design a wholly new one. They instead decided on taking a pre-existing battle mech, the Marauder, and transforming it with new technology, all while redesigning it specifically, from the ground up, to incorporate new cutting-edge upgrades. This would make the Marauder into the first second-generation clan iteration battlemech ever built. Then, in 2828, only a year after the introduction of the semi-complete upgrade of the Marauder C, the Marauder IIC took its first steps off an assembly line, in the very heart of Kerensky's new empire. But how was it such a radical departure from the original, you may ask? Firstly, it upgraded the Marauder from a 75-ton heavy mech to an 85-ton assault mech. It also fundamentally rebuilt its appearance, as well as its fighting capabilities. Systems were altered to fully exploit the best clan weaponry of the time, as well as hardening its survivability. The Marauder of old was a duelist machine, more so from the desires of its pilots, rather than from the realities of its capabilities. This was no longer the case with the 2C. Intended for the clan dueling system, it had multiple fight-ending weapons on board, allowing it to utterly smash anything that came in front of it. Even heavier and slower assaults could and would be brushed aside as it delivered hellish waves of fire. Bigger, stronger, more durable, and more lethal in every way compared to its predecessor, the Marauder 2C became almost immediately the most prized and powerful battlemech in clan space. In fact, for its age of introduction, it fulfilled the role of the Timberwolf, first in the clan Wolf Tumen, and then in the other clans it proliferated to. These machines were the ultimate prize. Many Khans in the early history of the clans opted to pilot the ever-famous and SLDF-aligned Highlander, especially after it received a clan upgrade package, and they too were merely pushed aside, even when piloted by some of the best warriors in history, by the might of this new sinister figure. The Marauder IIC was the first fully clan mech that truly could destroy any chassis with an inner sphere origin, even when brought up to a newer standard. No halfway upgrade would stop its relentless advance in any circle of equals. And this would, tragically, be proven in the most consequential trial in the clan's early history. After the destruction of Clan Wolverine, two clans at the center of that tragedy, Clans Widowmaker and Wolf, would find themselves on an escalation ladder to annihilation. Trade disputes began to appear between the two powers, namely because Clan Wolf, which had ironically destroyed Clan Wolverine for deviating too far from the way of the clans, had allowed their merchants to run a loose operation regarding following established norms, giving their own clan a greater advantage in the realm of international trade in the Kerensky cluster. The Widowmakers, now under Khan Jorgensen after his predecessor had been killed for his own shameful activities, staged a massed insurrection on the economic stage against the Wolves. This act resulted in the Wolves calling for the censuring of the Widowmakers' Khan. Nicholas Kerensky or the Council appeared to have ordered the death of the main ones deemed responsible in the merchant castes for the trade dispute by the military, shocking both participating clans. The Widowmakers immediately blamed Clan Wolf for the harsh response by the Council towards the incident. This then caused Khan Jerome Winson to strike back with accusations that the Widowmakers' behavior and underhanded tactics had abrogated their right to rule, and that their assets should be distributed amongst the other clans. The Grand Council then proceeded to agree with Clan Wolf, for reasons well past this individual dispute itself. A vote was carried out and passed unanimously, and the dissolution of Clan Widowmaker was to take place. This had only one possible outcome now, however, which was that Clan Widowmaker had to issue a trial of refusal against the Council. The trial of absorption that followed was launched on October 7th, 2834, with the honor of it being carried out by Clan Wolf. The Wolves had already destroyed the Wolverines prior, making them now the hammer of Kerensky's will in regards to wayward clans seemingly. This trial in particular, interestingly, was to be the last true moments of the foundation of the clans, and the beginning of their golden age. In the midst of the intense fighting between the two clans, a trial of grievance was launched by the two Khans, Jorgensen and Winson. As to what they were armed with for this duel of fate, Jorgensen used a heavily modified and clan tech upgraded Highlander, while Winson used the new, powerful Marauder IIC. The further Jerome's mech carried him from the spot on which Nicholas was killed, the more the event kept replaying over and over in his mind, unbidden. The whole thing happened so fast. In the middle of the refusal over Jerome's call for Clan Wolf to absorb Clan Widowmaker, Widowmaker Khan Carl Jorgensen had challenged Jerome to a trial of grievance. Jerome was the better warrior, so he had Jorgensen on the ropes in very short order. PPC strikes tore through the hips of Jorgensen's Highlander, inflicting the mech with a devastating limp Jerome planned to exploit to the fullest. That moment, a star of Jorgensen's Widowmakers violated the circle of equals, and then everything unraveled into single, still frames. An internal recollection of the events of the trial of refusal on Ironhold by Khan Jerome Winson. In the tense battle between the two Khans, it was clear that Jerome had the edge. The fate of the Widowmakers was sealed in this ugly brawl, and not simply because their Khan's mech was losing and was already limping after it had its hip almost blown off by the Marauder's particle cannons. Widowmaker Mechwarriors broke the circle of equals when their Khan's prospects shattered, throwing the entire battle into chaos. And in that discord, Ilclan Nicholas Kerensky within his Atlas II, stormed into the midst of the trial, demanding the situation be resolved, only to have his mech's head blasted by Jorgensen's Highlander's ER large laser, killing the father of the clans in a flash of crimson energy. Jorgensen is unlikely to have killed his mentor on purpose, but that was hardly of any consequence now. Khan Winson, after it was clear his Ilclan was dead, especially after the burnt state of his body was discovered, killed the offending Mechwarriors for breaking the circle of equals, before going into a rage, continuing to attack the Widowmaker force. The Widowmakers were massacred by the wolves. Khal, who was the one who accidentally half-melted the Ilclan, was then executed for his crime. Jerome Winson was elevated to Ilclan of the clans in the aftermath of the absorption. The menacing Marauder IIC which he used to crush the Widowmakers had been his chariot in the battle, and represented not only the changes the clans had went through from their time in the Pentagon Worlds and Kerensky cluster, but represented the true fighting power of the clans. Its reign of terror lasted decades as the most fearsome fighter amongst them, until the arrival of the next generation of clan equipment, Omnimechs. One of the most influential mechs of all time, the original second-generation clan experiment, and the most powerful, desired, and robust clan battle mech crafted prior to the invention of the Omnimech. The Marauder IIC is a spectacularly simple, elegant, and sinister design. Being an assault mech weighing in at 85 tons, it outmatched almost every contender it was put up against, perhaps only barring the Warhammer 2C, which was built only 1 year after its introduction in 2828. The mech makes smart choices, investing heavily in advanced, new, lightweight materials, while simultaneously avoiding the costliest choices available, making it an excellent mech for production overall, even if imperfect. Its clan-quality chassis, a Type 850 Light, is of clan endosteel construction, allowing for the mech to save on weight at the expense of internal critical spacing. Clan endosteel, however, is extremely compact, though it is somewhat more difficult to produce in terms of its core materials and overall timescales. The clan economy shouldering the burden of crafting such components, however, crushes labor costs to a minimum, allowing such high-quality products to be produced for their tumens at a lower cost. This advanced, spaceborne material is also found in several of the weapons and additional support systems found in most clan mechs, and almost every machine of clan quality, even without an endosteel internal skeleton. In terms of its other core features, just due to the date of its creation, the Marauder IIC has a standard gyro and cockpit. In respect to cooling, which is extremely vital for the Marauder IIC, it has a total of 21 clan-quality double heatsinks, letting it expel 42 points of heat per turn. And even with this significant total, the 2C has a tendency to run hot. While not significantly undersynced, it is notable that in an intense duel or battle, the Marauder 2C will be forced to choose its firing solutions every turn with extreme care, just to prevent it from redlining too hard. In regards to its onboard electronics, the latest iteration of the Marauder 2C uses a Series D8CC25XA communications package, as well as a Hermes CT42 Mark II targeting and tracking system. Notably, the mech benefits from the Command Mech trait, which means some elements of these systems and how they are configured must be part of what confers this benefit overall. In regards to additional traits on top of these in the advanced rules, the 2C has hyperextending actuators, but has the drawback of exposed actuators. These, again though, only apply with the application of the advanced rules. The Marauder IIC mimics its predecessor almost entirely in regards to its agility and mobility. It lacks jump jets, and is more or less bound to the earth which it stands on. In addition, it follows an inner sphere rate of movement for the purposes of warfare. This is a relic of the past, as clan warfare, as of the time of the development of the Marauder IIC, still moved more closely to the traditional rate of fighting. This is one of the few spaces a clan warrior might point to as a flaw for the Marauder IIC, while of course not taking into account the mech's other virtues. That is all to say, the Marauder IIC is powered by a massive 27-ton Consolidated Fusion 340 standard engine, giving it a maximum speed of 64 km per hour, or 6 movement points in the tabletop game. This means mechs such as the Summoner, or Timberwolf, or a variety of other clan heavies and light assaults have a distinct edge against the Marauder in this field, but at the cost of them requiring XL engines. While not directly related to mobility per se, the 2C's 340 standard engine makes it a very hard target indeed. It is less likely to suffer engine damage in combat. It is significantly cheaper to produce, as its engine, the most expensive part of any battle mech, is frankly a simpler and more robust configuration. And this means it has less space and exposure to actually take damage in the first place. Still, in the fast pace that characterizes clan duels in the centuries that follow its introduction, the Marauder IIC is considered comparatively sluggish, though it is not so unwieldy as to be helpless, or to be relegated to being a lumbering gunboat. The original incarnation of the Marauder never really was able to be protected to the extent that its developers had wanted. This changed fundamentally with the 2C, even in its base form. First and foremost, being 85 tons guarantees the 2C has more internal structure to support itself should its armor fail. Secondly, it has a clan case system, which is not effective in this particular build, but does help with other designs. Most importantly though, it applies clan quality ferrofibrous plating, which replaces its original Star League era equivalent. This means that the 2C, despite only having 11.5 tons of armor, has a shockingly effective total of armored pips, in that it has 220 of them. While this does not make the Marauder IIC the most heavily armored Marauder, nor does it make it extremely well guarded for its tonnage, it is protected enough to keep it from being destroyed in most firefights. In fact, because it has no ammunition on board, and its weapons take up such a modest volume of its internal storage, it is in fact deceptively durable, making it almost an ideal zombie mech, even. When you aim to remove this piece from the field, be sure to overinvest in its destruction. The Marauder IIC, despite some of its cooling issues, should it be in a truly desperate struggle, is one of the most smartly armed assault mechs ever conceived. It is also one of the deadliest. On top of this, it in many senses fixes some of the greatest limitations of the original Marauder. The biggest break from the original is that it discards the use of an autocannon as its dorsal gun. This means that the mech has zero ammunition dependency, and in this case, its firepower is greatly enhanced. Now let's go over how. First, I'm going to do this by simply telling you its primary armaments, which are a set of 3 Type DDS Kingston Clantech ERPPCs, also known as Extended Range Particle Projection Cannons. It has 1 in each arm and 1 mounted into the left torso, which is installed as the dorsal cannon. Each one of these hit with the full force of a Gauss rifle, and can instantly headcap an enemy mech should its lightning find it. These are the main systems most Marauder 2Cs will use in their duels, and they are exceptionally dangerous. Discharging all 3, while moving the mech turn on turn, will begin to have consequences quite quickly on the overheat scale, and so cycling is key at certain points of the battle to keep the mech from overheating too much. Outside of this, the mech is far from helpless. To start with, it has 2 Series PPS-19 medium pulse lasers, with 1 in each arm. These are extremely accurate and are great for handling lighter threats that get too close. And finally, as its last line of defense, it has 4 Series 1 ER small lasers, with 2 in the center torso and 1 in each side torso. giving it an additional backup set of weapons should things begin to get desperate, or should it need to filter out PPC fire to cool down against a close enemy. Overall, the Marauder IIC is fantastically gunned. Just be careful not to push it too hard, or you will find the cost of doing so might be too high once the enemy backs you into a corner. Often, Battletech manufacturers and engineers can't be sure of the impact that their mech will have, in full, in both the history of warfare or what it will mean in the hands of those who will pilot them. The Marauder IIC is not such a case. It was rebuilt from the very concept of the original Marauder, from the ground up, to be everything its ancestor design strove to be, but could never quite achieve. It plugs almost every hole in the design and overcomes every shortcoming, using new, powerful technologies to do so. For the era of warfare it was made within, it is almost perfect. At range, it is a deadly sniper. In close, it can shred targets with an array of deceptively powerful lasers. It cannot be quickly removed from any battle, save through decapitation, and it is a scourge on any battlefield where its presence is found. Its only shortcoming, the only true weakness that can be exploited, is that it runs very hot in the hands of inexperienced pilots who can push it too hard, trying to get the most optimal results too early. If this opening is ever given, take it. Otherwise, prepare to face a storm of light and thunder, wielded by the most sinister of clan warriors. Following shortly after the original Marauder IIC was put into service, the Marauder IIC-9 came to the clan Homeworlds only 3 years later in 2831. Exclusively used by clans Wolf and Jade Falcon at its introduction, it would be, by the end of the Succession Wars era, proliferated across the entirety of clan space, albeit in seemingly small numbers, as this variant appears to have fallen somewhat out of favor by the time of the clan invasion. It returned to prominence in the Dark Age due to the influence of clan Jade Falcon. As for what it does, it's a variation that makes several changes in order to get more out of its particle cannons, but at the cost of developing some ammunition dependencies. Meaningfully, in terms of its internal systems, only a single extra double heatsink is added to the mech, making it much better at being able to routinely fire its 3 devastating Clantech ER PPCs. The next reconfiguration comes on the weapons end of things, though. Obviously, it retains the aforementioned PPCs, but everything else in its arsenal shifts. The medium pulse lasers and small lasers are stripped from the mech, and they are replaced by a pair of Streak SRM-4 launchers, mounted in the center torso and in the right torso. It also goes on to mount its ammunition into the center torso too, just to make people who use them feel paranoid. Don't worry, the case will contain the explosion to the center torso. So, overall, the 2C9 adds close-range crit-seeking capabilities with its new missiles. It also has better cooling in regards to its 3 main cannons. Where things go awry, somewhat, is that there is ammunition in the center torso, much to the horror of many Mechwarriors and commanders, and it lacks the accuracy and full range of secondary systems of the original. As with all things, it is a trade-off. One many were willing to make, evidently. Mercy. Mercy is something the weak pray for from the strong. I have no mercy. The best an opponent can hope from me is my respect. If he has not earned that, then he is little more than a pest to be exterminated for the common good, and will be treated as such. A Wolf Clan Mechwarrior, Rasalhague News Network, 12th of July, 3050. A new technology emerged in the Golden Century from the den of Clan Coyote, the clan most closely associated and allied with Clan Wolf, it should be noted. This breakthrough technology was none other than the Omnimech. It was a new kind of battlemech that changed everything in regards to warfare for the clans. Rapid deployments of extremely expensive, high-performance battlemechs with pre-configured fighting packages or even custom configurations simply offered too many bonuses and options to the warrior caste for these not to be the most desired machines within their tumens. Frontline galaxy formations, only a few years after the arrival of the first Omnimechs, across any clan that could produce or procure them, made these machines their default standards. The best warriors received the most desirable mechs that entirely played into the clan's way of warfare. In comparison to the latest, cutting-edge equipment from the clans, older, static machines were viewed as relics. They required longer to repair due to their lack of omnipods, and obviously they could not shift configurations in as little as a half an hour. An Omnimech, for instance, should it have a damaged system on board, can simply unhook the weapon or equipment, slide the pods out of the mech, and insert a new pod with a replacement weapon. This gets much more complicated if there is serious structural damage to the Omnimech, but that is not always the case in how the clans fight one another. For the purposes of duels, or even lightning-fast campaigns, older mechs simply had less value. Where did this leave mechs such as the Marauder IIC? As with most of its peer designs, mechs of the second-generation clan designation, or of new clan designs that were not Omnimechs, ended up becoming known as second-line mechs. Second-line and provisional garrison formations, traditionally, tend to be placed in a defensive and supporting role. Galaxies and clusters that fall into these classifications tend to be less well supported with omnipods and omnimechs, and instead are dependent on older designs, refits, and yes, second-line battlemechs. So while they do have omnimechs in these units as well, it's by no means a guarantee that these less than stellar warriors, at least by the ideas which the clans judge their warriors, will possess them. Ironically, this also means that these mechs, which have been labeled as less capable, often have less worthy pilots, only further cementing their reputations. Now, there is a method to this madness. In that second-line mechs, despite taking longer to fix, and being static in their configurations, were cheaper to build and cheaper overall to work on. The clans functionally crush labor and compensation for said labor by virtue of how their economy works. So many real costs are truly based on materials more than anything. Clan omnipods, while easier to work with for instance, cost more, and are logistically harder to support over a long campaign. There is a finite number of omnipods, and if they are damaged or you run out of them, you simply no longer have omnipods. For the purposes of defensive battles, utilizing older mech designs too often means not necessarily needing to swap out mechs for repeated engagements either, which is a further cost saving. Still, for a time, mechs like the Marauder IIC were wonders to the warriors who piloted them. By the end of the Golden Century, they were relegated to services which were not of the quality that they deserved. Fascinatingly, in a protracted campaign across a huge logistics chain, something the clans did not truly have to deal with across the Kerensky cluster, these older designs, not dependent on expensive omnipod technologies, in fact, had much more merit than many would give them credit for. But this was not something that would be wrestled with for almost 200 years after the introduction of the Omnimech itself, and the decline of machines such as the Marauder IIC. But wrestle with it the clans would, because of the turbulence and chaos that would be unleashed in the middle of the 31st century. The arrival of a Comstar Explorer Corps vessel, the outbound Light, in Clan Smoke Jaguar territory, triggered the beginning of the end of the clan's isolation and self-imposed exile. Prior to this tragedy, there had been a significant struggle, politically, between two ideological groups. These were the Crusaders and the Wardens. The former of these wanted to return to the Inner Sphere to conquer them, and the latter wished to ward their wayward cousins. The Crusaders always had a variety of clans coming to the fore as ideological and military leaders, whether that be Clan Jade Falcon, Ghost Bear, or Smoke Jaguar. However, the Wardens truly only ever had one head of the pack, Clan Wolf. It was the Wolves that most fiercely defended their cause in the Clan Council, and fought for it in trial after trial. Years, decades of these efforts prior to the arrival of the Outbound Light eventually led to the Dragoon Compromise, which of course created the Wolf's Dragoons, who were sent as forward scouts and spies to report back on the status of the Inner Sphere. The Dragoons famously eventually went quiet, even though they still harbored loyalty to the Warden clan, at least until later in the 31st century. When the clan inevitably failed in their efforts to stall or stop the invasion of the Inner Sphere, with their defeat at the hands of the other clans in their bid to refuse what would become Operation Revival, they still attempted to moderate the invasion where they could. Unfortunately for the Clan of Clans, they were compelled to join the invasion itself as an act of pettiness on the parts of their enemies, who used the excuse of the Kerensky bloodline to force their involvement. When Operation Revival was launched, Clans Ghost Bear, Smoke Jaguar, and Jade Falcon had earned the right to be at the forefront of the invasion. And of course, Clan Wolf 2 was awarded this honor. They were to invade the free Rasalhague Republic predominantly, taking up the corridor between the Jade Falcon invasion lane and the Ghost Bear one. The Wolves proved to be the most competent and capable of all the invading clans, cutting clan traditions most readily where needed, and by being the most adept and adaptable at facing off against their spheroid enemies, despite their Warden origins. They achieved the most military success overall, and pushed closer to Terra than any of the other clans. They were led by none other than the legendary Ulrich Kerensky, who decidedly wanted the invasion to come to a halt in many respects, and faced political resistance from his forced Crusader peers. He would go on to be one of the most consequential figures in clan history, eventually claiming the title of Ilclan. He would also command the Battle for Tukiad, where his clan would be the only one to achieve all of their military objectives on World. Ultimately, however, Kerensky was the clan's overall commander, and thus their overall defeat was something worn by Clan Wolf, though some within the clans themselves considered the defeat to be something born of the Wolves, intentionally almost, and they believed that they had contempt for the other clans. This shaped the world the Marauder IIC came into when the clans made their return to the Inner Sphere. In regards to its importance to the invasion itself, it was almost entirely negligible, outside of seeing some deployments by various clans during the Battle for Tukiad, and in some defensive battles against raiders in the occupation zone, which were being defended by second-line forces. On Tukiad in particular, second-line mechs saw more prevalent usage from almost every invading clan, if for no other reason than to compensate for their stretched supply lines and the attrition that they'd suffered in the invasion so far. It was also the case that in many instances, second-line galaxies became a part of the core components fighting across these battlefields. Mechs such as the Warhammer 2C and Phoenix Hawk 2C salvaged their reputation in the fields of this intense and decisive historical battle, and the Marauder 2C is no different than its peers in this respect. But even when taking this into account, it is nonetheless a footnote in the grand scale of the losing effort of the battle. Regardless, the mass migration to the Inner Sphere from the clans did stick, even after the reversal at Tukiad. The clans put down roots in their captured locations and occupied territories, and they began converting Inner Sphere factories for their purposes, while also building whole new industrial complexes too. But in these early years, those being in the 3050s, the Marauder IIC production lines never arrived. The Wolves, the original makers of the mech, never transplanted its production to the inner sphere, even by the time they might have considered doing such a thing. The clan had entered into a massive war with the Jade Falcons, what was dubbed the Refusal War, which would see the death of its traditional warden leadership. What appeared on the other side was a region and power ruled by one Vladimir Ward, a ruthless crusader if there ever was one. Vlad's wolves, the eventual ideological winners of the clan, focused on new designs and powerful Omnimechs as they expanded and seized additional production capacity. But this did not mean that the Marauder IIC was not going to make its way to the inner sphere. As in the Homeworlds, long before the invasion, the Marauder IIC had already proliferated. It found a home with Clan Burrock, and then later with the creators of the cousin design to the Marauder IIC, as they faced their deadly and determined enemies. Another alteration of the original 2C, the Marauder IIC-8 was first introduced in 3025, 24 years before the launch of Operation Revival into the Inner Sphere. The 2C-8 shares much of the same story as the 2C-9, with it eventually becoming available to all clans during its initial rollout, but being less common until the Dark Age, and once more due to the influence of Clan Jade Falcon. This particular modification seems to be about diversifying the 2C's weapons once more, but this time in a more significant way. In many senses, it may even be more of a mirror to the Warhammer 2C's weapon profile. In regards to its internal components and systems, it almost entirely mirrors the original 2C. In respects to its changes in weaponry, it starts by removing its left arm mounted ER-PPC, while retaining the torso mounted one as well as the right arm mounted cannon. This means it can still head clip with two systems, making it extremely lethal. The changes from here are quite significant. It installs 4 medium pulse lasers, making it exceptionally accurate in middle range engagements. 2 of these are installed into the left arm, and the other 2 are split between the center and right torso. After this, it has an ER small laser in the left torso, as well as an LRM-10 missile system with 1 ton of ammunition. The LRM launcher gives it some ability to crit seek at range, and pairs well with its PPCs. Overall, the 2C-8 is more accurate in close-in fights, and can harass and snipe effectively at long range, all while being more balanced in terms of its thermal footprint overall. Its sustain is better than its burst damage, in effect. The downside? Onboard ammunition can still explode, and it's only got 2, rather than 3, head-destroying systems and hole punchers. It works out just fine for its cousin, the Warhammer 2C. There's no reason it can't work out here as well. Evidence recently uncovered, however, shows that the Burrocks lied, not only to the Cloud Cobras, but also to the Grand Council. Far from destroying them, they allowed their former comrades to go free. From that point begins the long trail of association between the bandit caste and Burrock leaders that ultimately damned the Burrock clan. When Khan Cassius Ninbuta discovered this evidence, he also realized that Burrock Khan Jocelyn Siddiq was doing her best to cover up her clan's treason. He immediately called for the right to absorb the Burrocks. Distressed at their own clan's dishonor, a majority of Burrock warriors refused to follow Siddiq's final order: fight to the death. Except for those responsible for the treason, every former Burrock warrior and civilian has become part of Clan Staradder. The history of the Burrock's treachery will die with those who perpetrated it, but the legacies of the rest will live on. Excerpt from an unknown contributor. Clan Council Report, November 19th, 3059. The clan occupation zone saw a series of intense rivalries break out between the various powers within it, and between the region and the surrounding great houses after the peace that was established took Yid, and after that was reaffirmed with the Great Refusal and the destruction of Clan Smoke Jaguar. Second Line forces were increasingly called up to fight in frontline battles in these conflicts as well. To name a handful of the conflicts that broke out, there was the brutal battles between Clan Jade Falcon and all of its neighbors in the occupation zone, for instance, such as the Hagira War, the Refusal War, and the campaign against Coventry. But this also said nothing of the fighting that broke out between Clan Ghostbear and Wolf, or between the Bears and the Draconis Combine. With much of their holdings still being established on shaky grounds, mechs were transplanted from the Homeworlds to these new war zones by Clan Diamond Shark, acting as a middleman and seller. Burrock and Wolf Marauder IICs traveled with the Sharks all the way into the Inner Sphere, and were then placed into the inventories of every clan power in the region, replenishing these clans' backline forces and allowing their localized production centers to focus on more important Omnimech developments, or fleshing out their local infrastructure. This trade, unironically, did lead to the first Inner Sphere built and designed Marauder IIC. The Ghostbear Dominion, the military juggernaut of the invasion corridor, opted to cut out the Diamond Sharks from their need for Marauder IICs. Once the design was adopted thoroughly enough, they ended up assigning Gorton, Kingsley, and Thort Enterprises on Salatis to reverse engineer and produce the mech. There was also a need to make dramatic changes to the design as well, resulting in their own direct model being put into production. And this place would become, for a time, the last home for the Marauder IIC accessible to the entirety of the Inner Sphere, if only because of the catastrophe that emerged in the 3060s in the Clan Homeworlds. This was a man-made horror that finds much of its origins not only in the Inner Sphere with Clan Steel Viper, whom often shoulder the majority of the blame for those events, but in the bitter and violent rivalry that formed between the most powerful clan in the Homeworlds, and arguably the weakest. In a very short period of time after the defeat of Clan Wolf at the hands of Clan Jade Falcon in the Refusal War, it was discovered by Clan Staradder that the leadership of Clan Burrock had been aiding and abetting the reviled Dark Caste, otherwise also known as the Bandit Caste of the Clan Homeworlds. This was an unforgivable offense. The situation created an enormous opportunity for the Adders in its discovery as well, as their Khan, Cassius Nebuta, brought the issue before the Great Council of the Clans, not only denouncing their Burrock peers, but also demanding their absorption. The Burrocks had few, if any, political allies, and had always earned a reputation for being less than honorable in their dealings, meaning of course that the rest of the clans agreed that Clan Staradder was free to engage in a trial of absorption against the Burrocks, who naturally issued a trial of refusal in response. The Staradders, for reference, were the other clan founded by someone close enough to Nicholas Kerensky for him to be considered a brother. They bore a striking resemblance to the Wolves in many respects, while differing in very specific and important ways. The Staradders resembled much more of an actual military force of the old school, and perhaps least fit the clan mold in some respects as a result. However, they were exceptionally dangerous and specialized in things such as strategy and logistics. This specialization may have played a role in their immediate desire to absorb Clan Burrock as well. Doing so would swell their Tumen's ranks, but would also dramatically expand their military's productive capacity in regards to battle mechs and aerospace fighters. The primary issue with all of this came from something that Clan Staradder hadn't entirely taken into consideration, however, in that Clan Bloodspirit, the ancient and bitter rival to Clan Burrock, was beyond livid when the Grand Council chose the more prevalent and serious Star Adders to undertake the absorption, rather than themselves. All the same, multiple galaxies were locked into combat shortly after things were decided in February of 3059. The battleground? The Burrock homeworld of Albion. The Burrocks bid their entire tumen for the trial, including 3 frontline galaxies and 4 second-line galaxies. With the second-line formations in play, the Burrocks, who had a number of second-line mechs, were the principal deployer of the Marauder IIC, while the Star Adders, ironically, were the principal operators of the Warhammer 2C in their formations. It was to be a classic battle in this respect if there ever was one. Before the Burrocks could ever hope to fully prepare their home world for war, the Adders were already upon them, including several warships. The Star Adder warships interdicted the reinforcements that had been called in to save the clan's homeworld, unfortunately for the Burrocks, meaning that the threat to the clan was increased enormously. The snakes from this point forward had a clear and cunningly delivered advantage. The battle for Albion on the ground was intense. 4 Burrock galaxies clashed with 3 Star Adder galaxies. Despite the difference in the number of galaxies, it doesn't tell the whole story. A galaxy as an organizational structure can vary wildly in size, and the Star Adder's galaxies were more robust and also, unfortunately for the Burrocks, significantly better led. Khan Nenbuta himself, despite resistance, enacted a series of engagements as a part of a large plan to crush his Burrock counterparts by killing their leadership. Within 48 hours of the intense fighting beginning, both Khans of Clan Burrock were dead. Even their galaxy commanders were killed in action, with the highest-ranking Burrock remaining being a Star Colonel, one Carlos Hutchinson, by the 3rd day of the fighting. Khan Sadiq, the prior Khan of Clan Burrock, had asked her soldiers to fight to the death prior to her departure from life, but this attitude was not something that prevailed amongst the clan's rank and file. As this bloodletting turned sour, Hutchinson opted to try to save his clan from utter annihilation, as he knew if they continued the fight as they were doomed. None of his clan's culture, traditions, or individuals would survive. As a consequence, he offered to duel Cassius and Buta directly in order to determine the outcome of the trial, knowing full well that he was extremely likely to lose that struggle. But this would mean that his clan and its people would be absorbed rather than destroyed. This did not take place as planned, at least not as intended. Another player entered the game of death that was at hand. Bitter and furious over being denied their vengeance against Clan Burrock, Clan Bloodspirit directly intervened, landing on Albion with 3 galaxies in order to scour the planet of any and all Burrocks, from the lowest of civilians to the remaining leadership and warriors. The Star Adders did not take this well, and in a furious rage, turned their guns immediately onto the Bloodspirits, striking at them without any concern for their beleaguered Burrock foes. The spirits had broken a key rule within the clans, in that they had no right to be there, and they had no right to anything of the Burrocks. The council had determined that this was a trial the Star Adders were to fulfill, not them. This attack caught the Blood Spirits off guard, and it was only made worse when the Burrocks immediately moved to join the Star Adders. The 2 clans even fought alongside one another in this new battle for the remnants of the doomed clan. It took 5 days of fighting, but after it was done, the Blood Spirit galaxies that landed on Albion were utterly shattered. Of the 3 galaxies they landed, only 2 clusters survived. The small but elite clan had overstepped their boundaries and suffered for it, but this defeat would not be forgotten. The Star Adders would absorb Clan Burrock shortly afterwards, taking the lion's share of everything that had remained of the clan, including its warriors. The 2 sides even formed a mutual respect in their battle against the spirits, and also out of the respect the Adders had shown for their diminished foes. And on this victory, the now ascending Clan Star Adder became the most powerful clan within the Homeworlds, if not the most powerful clan in all of human space. The factories of the Burrocks now distributed their goods to this unified entity, and they would be turned onto the blood spirits to reap a terrible vengeance upon them for their insolence and interference. From this bounty of materials, the Marauder IIC was in fact one of the mechs to be transformed and then used extensively in their efforts to undermine and destroy the spirit's homeworld of York. It was Galaxy Commander Stanislav Nimbuta that reformed Beta Galaxy from the ground up after the successful trial of absorption, and he did so with a campaign against the blood spirits in mind. A new configuration of the Marauder IIC was put into production from Albion MMA Complex in order to flesh out Beta Galaxy, a frontline galaxy no less, with second-line mechs. Stanislav carried the belief that his forces could utilize second-line mechs effectively in battle, especially in campaigns where sustainability mattered more over the course of the long term. While the Warhammer 2C became the face of this to many outside powers due to how it was implemented, finally breaking the taboo against second-line mechs for most Trueborns, the Marauder 2C was central to this plan as well, and was deployed in numbers when Clan Starrider unleashed hell upon the planet of York. The reprisals against the Blood Spirits was an escalation that contributed greatly to the conditions that would begin the Wars of Reaving. However, in the meantime, there was a desperate and ugly struggle for the planet of York. The Blood Spirits had miscalculated on Albion badly. It also meant that a rivalry emerged between the two clans that would only be settled when one was dead or in ruins. Sadly, it was between the smallest of the clans, in the form of Clan Blood Spirit, and now the largest and most powerful clan, Clan Starrider. On the surface of York, Beta Galaxy and other forces of Clan Starrider crashed into clan enclaves and did fantastic damage. Using none other than these second-line mechs, they changed the nature of clan warfare as they did, and for the worst. Only a short time later, the Wars of Reaving would be upon the entirety of the Homeworlds, and its tone would be set by the carnage the Blood Spirits and Starriders were willing to inflict upon one another. And as a core part of it all, the sinister frame of the Marauder 2C casts its shadows over the fires that helped ignite the entirety of the Kerensky cluster. But to service to break the back of Clan Blood Spirit, the Marauder 2C2 was a revolutionary design for its time, and a trend-setting machine that would help break the stranglehold of Clan Omnimechs in the Kerensky cluster and beyond. First produced in 3063, this reimagining of the original shares many of its progenitors' features, all while being a significantly different mech. To start with, it retains the 2C1's endo-steel skeleton, and its standard engine. It also keeps its ferrofibrous, but increases it to 12.5 tons, making it more durable and survivable. In regards to its movement, 4 jump jets are installed, allowing it to leap up to 120 meters. As if that weren't enough, it also expands its cooling capacity to a shocking 24 double heat sinks, letting it vent up to 48 points of heat per turn. In this instance, it's going to need that, because this thing runs hot. Why is that the case, you may ask? Because the Marauder 2C2 has twin heavy large lasers, with one in each arm, as well as twin medium pulse lasers, once again split between the 2 limbs. And finally, it has a center torso mounted ER large laser. This mech does not have the heat budget to fire all of these weapons safely, as it will generate a staggering 58 points of heat if it alpha strikes and stays still. Though it does mean that it can fire its entire battery of arm-based weapons and not be overwhelmed. This is still an intense level of damage, though its heavy large lasers are not as accurate as the base mech's PPCs. Still, this Marauder was used to great effect in the battles against the Blood Spirits, and across the Wars of Reaving. Afterwards, in the Inner Sphere, it continued its service within the inventories of Clan Jade Falcon and the Rasalhague Dominion. The Marauder IIC appears first in 3064, and saw deployment across the entirety of the Homeworlds and the Inner Sphere in regards to clan adoption. The mech once more retains many of the virtues of the core Marauder IIC chassis, and this time puts it back towards a slightly more traditional take on the mighty second-generation clan mech. It retains the entirety of the Marauder IIC's base configuration, barring having 22 double heatsinks instead of 21. Otherwise, its armor, internal structure, and engine are all the same. So where do things change? As you can guess, it's all in the weaponry. First of all, it has a pair of Clantech ER PPCs, with one in each arm. Then it has 2 ER small lasers in the center torso. So far, this very much resembles the standard 2C. However, things change with the final onboard system, which is a devastating ATM-12 launcher. This allows it to fire multiple types of ammunition, with the most powerful at close range allowing the launcher to potentially deliver a hellish 36 damage in a single volley. In essence, its PPCs blast holes in enemy armor, and the ATMs find them. It's a simple method to destroy an enemy, and it works with enough mechs over time that it's tried and tested. First built in 3070 near the official opening of the Blakest era, this monstrous mech is the first Marauder IIC to use a radically different as well as advanced weapon system, and it also is the first variant to make serious adjustments to the internal components of the Marauder IIC chassis and core systems. The Marauder IIC-4 only has its base complement of heatsinks, and retains its endo steel frame. Beyond this, the 4 upgrades its engine to a Clan XL version of its classic 340 power plant. After this, it also goes on to strip out the ferrofibers that the entire chassis is known for and installs 15 tons of standard plating. 4 jump jets are brought on board as well. Overall, this means that the mech is somewhat more maneuverable, but it is more likely to suffer an engine kill against it. The saved tonnage, however, does indeed go a long way, because the Marauder IIC-4 invests heavily in brand new ballistic systems built on Gauss technologies. In fact, it only has 2 weapons, period, mounted in its arms, and partially in its side torsos. The IIC-4 only possesses a single pair of HAG 40 Hyper Assault Gauss systems. It also possesses an enormous 30 rounds of ammunition for the 2 guns as well, which means it has enough ammo to easily get through a single engagement. Though in a protracted campaign with limited support, this may be problematic. Regardless, these 2 cannons are so impressive that almost no mech would want to face the storm of sandblasting power it can expel. It will erode away even the hardiest of assault mechs, unless they are equipped with very specific protective measures, such as ballistic reinforced armor or ferrolamellar plating. The Marauder IIC-4 is rightly feared for what it brings to the field of battle, and its service continues into the Ilclan era, of course. Another Blakest era configuration. Once more built in 3070, the Marauder IIC-5 is much more anchored in its original statistical profile. It once again keeps almost all of the Marauder IIC's original configuration of internal systems, outside of having 19 double heatsinks instead of 21. It also does go on to keep the original ZR PPCs, with 1 in each arm. Beyond this, it uses AP Gauss rifles in both arms too. Finally, it has a HAG 20 on the left torso with 2 tons of ammunition. The PPCs open up the target, the HAG attempts to exploit this. Once more, a common arrangement, even if the HAG 20's cluster strikes are perhaps a bit lacking compared to alternative systems. All the same, it is a powerful mech, within a generation of its introduction in the Inner Sphere. Once the clan Homeworlds were cut off, It slowly but surely became a Jade Falcon exclusive design into the Ilclan era. A wildly different take on the Marauder IIC in many ways. The Marauder IIC-6 is a leaping nightmare for its opponents to deal with. First deployed in 3077, it's definitely a vicious addition to the roster of clan second-line mechs of its era. This variant once more includes an endo-steel frame, and then goes on to reduce its heat sinks to 12, letting it dump 24 heat per turn. It also has 13 tons of standard armor, making it more vulnerable, potentially, to enemy fire, even if slightly, and then it goes on to install an XL engine as well, in order to accommodate more tonnage for other systems at the cost of durability. Specifically though, what it adds is it has 6 improved jump jets, letting it leap up to 180 meters, which is extremely significant, as it can jump as far as it can run, and it can generate significant defensive bonuses this way just by moving. Not even taking into account how it can further benefit from terrain as a result either, through its improved maneuverability. But what's it got for firepower? Well, it's no slouch. In the right arm, it supports a mighty Gauss rifle with 2 tons of ammunition, as well as an ER medium laser. In the left arm, it has an LB-10X autocannon with 3 tons of ammunition, as well as another ER medium laser. This, paired with its Gauss rifle, gives it a solid hole-punching ability, and great exploitation and crit-seeking functionality. And last but not least, as a critical backup torso weapon, it has a right torso-mounted heavy large laser, giving it an additional hole puncher, and potentially a head-clipping weapon to boot. Fast, agile, and deadly best describe the 2C6. Originally used exclusively by clans Wolf and Jade Falcon upon its introduction, by the current age, they are still the only users of the mech, even if it appears to only be manufactured on Sudeten. Built by the Rasalhague Dominion, the Marauder IIC-7 represents a configuration of this now venerable design that largely never migrated to other principal producers and operators of the mech, that being, by this era, Clan Jade Falcon. First put into service in 3081, it also represents the first variation of the mech assembled after the downfall of the Word of Blake, and more or less after the end of communications with the clan Homeworlds. It is also a radical departure from the standard profile the mech is known for. Outside of having endo steel, it basically has nothing in common with most other Marauder IICs. It has 12 double heat sinks, letting it dump 24 heat a turn. It also has 16.5 tons of armor, giving it the maximum amount using standard plating. Most notably though, it also has a smaller, 6.5 ton, 255 XL engine, and this means that this particular Marauder is slow, reaching a maximum speed of just 54 kilometers per hour. All of this of course is done to make way for weaponry and other systems on board. Before diving headlong into its guns, let's talk about its additional electronic components. First, it has an ECM suite, helping guard the mech electronically, but more importantly, it has a clan targeting computer, making it much more accurate with its weapons complement. Now to get down to what's going to erode its enemies more directly. It has a Hag 30 in the right arm with 12 rounds of ammunition. This is then backed up by an SRM-4 Streak in the same limb. Whereas the Hag has 3 tons of ammunition, the Streak only comes with 1 ton, but that is still more than enough. In the right torso, it has a large pulse laser, giving it even more deadly and accurate fire. A Gauss rifle can then be found in the left arm, giving it a devastating head-clipping potential, as well as the ability to hole punch. This system is supported by 2 tons of ammo, and another SRM-4 Streak can be found in this arm as well. Overall, the mech will devastate targets in close with its SRMs and Hag fire, which will be allowed to exploit the damage done by the Gauss rifle and large pulse laser beforehand. The main problem the 2C7 has? It's slow. An unwieldy mech can be devastating if it can force its enemies to fight it on its terms. There's no guarantee that that will happen. Ponderous and powerful has a place in warfare, but it must be managed appropriately, lest it be outmaneuvered and then destroyed. We have completed an epic journey and accomplished epic ends. We have carried the glory of Jade Falcon and the clans almost to the heart of the inner sphere, and we have paid an epic price in blood. History will sing that the cost was worth it, for Turkina's glory and our own. Yet we must assure ourselves of victory, and more, on terms that do not leave us too spent to hold our gains until, as they someday must, the Jade Falcon Tumen joins us to carry the banners of Crusade to the holy soil of Terra itself. In a little more than 100 hours, Falcons, Turkina will spread her wings above our last objective. Sky will lie at the mercy of our beak and talons. Help us to do more than await our pleasure as to when and where we strike, and how. We carry with us the fire to burn their cities from orbit. I say, let New Glasgow burn. Galaxy Commander Malvina Hazen, addressing her forces while on campaign. Sky, Prefecture 9, the Republic of the Sphere, August 10th, 3134. The road to destruction is often paved with the ambitions of those seeking glory, or even more often believing in their own myths even. Hubris, a term crafted and used extensively by the ancient Hellenic peoples of the classical era, originally meant violence, or an act which caused great outrage, but over time became contextualized as to mean an excessive amount of pride and arrogance, and most often leading to a grand and spectacular fall. The story of the last major producer of the Marauder IIC into the 32nd century, sadly, mirrors these ancient and historical stories quite closely. The clans of the Inner Sphere, in the aftermath of their expulsion from the Homeworlds, and the destruction of the Society, as well as the devastation of the Wars of Reaving and Blakest assault on the Inner Sphere, were forced to take on a series of difficult cultural, occupational, and ethical decisions regarding the future of their involvement within mankind's domain. For Clan Ghostbear, they eventually chose a path that led them to integrating further and further with the people of Rasalhague, creating a true hybrid culture of clanfolk and spherefolk. For Clan Snowraven, it was to walk a line closer to their Ghostbear counterparts. But for the other three territorial clans that existed at this time, they chose different paths. The one which was most extreme of these three was Clan Jade Falcon. The Falcons decided, notably, to walk the opposite end of the other side of this equation. How they got to that point, though, does have a story. Weakened ideologically and militarily in the aftermath of the events of the 3070s, the Jade Falcons sought to rebuild their strength, and found themselves unable to climb and soar as high as they once did. All the same, the attempt was made regardless of the outcome. Factories had already been retrofitted within the Clan Jade Falcon occupation zone, most notably on Sudeten, the capital of the Jade Falcons' new, prized Inner Sphere holdings. But other major complexes, of course, were scattered across their empire. In order to try to scrape their way back from losing multiple galaxies worth of Mechwarriors and materials, they needed simple mechs to build that could hold their own in both front and second line formations. One of the mechs chosen at the lower mix of this equation, and put into production on Sudeten, was the original Marauder IIC. It made perfect sense. It had a simple engine, excellent firepower, and the overall bulk and weight to survive in the ruthless environment of the 3080s and beyond. It was also surprisingly inexpensive to manufacture for a clan assault mech. While it's not the most durable assault mech either, it was extremely repairable, and still had enough bulk to weather most storm. The Jade Falcons could use this quite successfully, in theory, against both clan and inner sphere adversaries. It was a logical addition to their Tumen's military-industrial complex, and would benefit the clan. Unfortunately for their makers, they didn't enjoy the kind of success that they were intending to. The Jade Falcons in the 3080s were, unfortunately, a basket case, and even more so than many of their peers. Falcon Sibco sizes were smaller than anticipated at the time, leaving them with a huge volume of warriors dead from their prior campaigns, and few new bodies to replace them. In other words, their Tumen lacked significant reserves, and their formations often weren't to the size and strength they had been in prior years. This did not stop them from campaigning against their neighbors, however, whether justified or not. There were ill-fated attempts by Archon Adam Steiner to exact revenge against his old enemies within the Jade Falcon occupation zone. Several significant probes entered their space and were crushed by the Falcon's talons, before Epsilon Galaxy struck into the heart of the Lyran defenses along the border, though this counterattack was withdrawn sometime later. The Falcons didn't have everything go their own way, as they also failed to supplant the Lyrans on Grouse until the Steiners themselves opted to leave, but only after they had vanquished several major Falcon attempts to dislodge them, forcing the Falcons to pay an outsized quantity of blood for their conquest. The planet did of course eventually become a Falcon trophy, but it was hardly one whose conquest deserved to be immortalized within their remembrance. Still, the decades that followed were hardly more kind to the Jade Falcons, the latest masters of the Marauder IIC. The Falcons struggled as they attempted to hold on to their Crusader roots, while dealing with a world where that kind of mindset was increasingly unproductive for them. They didn't succeed in acquiring the kind of honor or conquest that they had expected. The clan also didn't hybridize itself with local occupied populations, instead opting to attempt to assimilate them, creating more or less a miserable population for them to rule over, which led to these people having lower standards of living and the society having lower levels of economic activity. This was clan tradition, and everything that did not go into the people was more or less filtered into their war-making industries. Only those industries, as well as the warriors who commanded them, didn't produce the kind of success the clan needed to feed the thirst for honor its leaders, and would-be leaders, required to have a stable political system. The crisis in leadership and culture needed to be deflected, and the energies behind it contained and manipulated. This was done under Jaina Pride and Beckett Malthus. In order to appeal to a large enough contingent of warriors to get elected to the khanship, they encouraged division between the clan's younger warriors. This created the Slips and Jessies movement. Both sides still attempted to embrace what had been the Crusader philosophy, but in different ways. The Slips favored far more aggression against the houses and even other clans, while the Jessies wanted a more cautious approach, something more cerebral. It is from this former movement that the most consequential Khan in the history of Clan Jade Falcon would emerge. The tensions between the two sides created a great deal of instability within the clan until the removal of Ruel Chistu and the appointment of Jaina Pride as Khan, but she is a mere footnote in history. Within the Slip movement, Malvina Hazen emerged. Malvina had embraced what would become the dreaded Mongol doctrine of clan warfare, and transformed it into something even more fearsome. In fact, Malvina's interpretation of this battlefield tactic was considered so violent and vicious that the Jade Falcons under her command became renowned as being the only clan to meet and surpass the violent attributes of the former clan Smoke Jaguar, which the Inner Sphere vanquished during their counter-invasion of the clan Homeworlds with Operations Serpent and Bulldog in the prior century. The cruelty displayed by Malvina and her disciples, however, was not merely reserved for the victims within the Republic of the Sphere, Rasalhague Dominion, and Lyran Commonwealth. It was even unleashed upon their own, something that the Smoke Jaguars would have recoiled at. Malvina, in the eyes of most of the clans in the Inner Sphere, was rabid. The one who would eventually become known as the Great Khan challenged and defeated Khan Jaina Pride, ushering herself from disorderly rebel into the role she was destined for. The Great Chinggis Khan then purged or demoted anyone who remotely refused her orders within the clan. It's also noted that within Clan Jade Falcon at the time, there had been a lack of a traditional way to elevate themselves during the time of relative peace that was within the Inner Sphere, and Malvina's aggressive, vicious form of fighting provided honors and accolades to the rank and file in the clan, and this was enough to satisfy many of her less willing subordinates, who all came to accept Malvina's rule, with many even openly embracing it. She gave the Falcons a purpose again, one of violence and conquest of lesser, inferior peoples. Those that continued to hold out against the Watch, or her other forms of reprisal, slowly but surely were filtered into other castes, or were driven into exile. The few that remained who showed any signs of opposition to her would be inevitably left behind to be mere garrisons for their conquests, or for the core worlds the clan needed to fuel its further objectives. Speaking of fuel, Malvina happened to also cause a great deal of casualties to her own military in her rise to and the seizing of power. This was also because of her quashing violently any rebellion against her. This limitation, though, was offset by her inducting anyone who could pass a warrior trial test. Former cadets who'd washed out, for a variety of reasons, flooded her ranks, giving her a restored, revitalized, and most importantly, loyal cadre of new warriors, on top of those who were already now in lockstep behind her. Seizing worlds along her frontier that had once belonged to Clan Wolf, and then striking into the Lyran Commonwealth, and in doing so, striking down and vanquishing not only the LCAF, but utterly shattering the Kellhounds, who fought and died trying to protect the people of Ark Royal and nearby systems. She carved a bloody swathe throughout everywhere she went. She nearly even managed to get her fingers and talons gripped into Tharkad, had she not been outplayed by other parties, and her campaign against all of the neighbors of Clan Jade Falcon swelled the Jade Falcon occupation zone of control beyond anything anyone could have imagined. By this stage of the Jade Falcon's rampage across known space, the uttering of her name was enough to send fear into the hearts of even the most stalwart commanders of any army. And this would all come crashing down in a battle that ironically involved turning a creation upon its creators. Every campaign or conflict the Falcons waged really were all leading up to one final flourish. One cataclysmic event. In 3151, a great trial was ushered in by Khan Alaric Ward of Clan Wolf, who invited Clan Jade Falcon to participate in an attempt to seize Terra itself. The Republic had given Khan Ward the means to pass through the fortress wall, a protective barrier that had prevented jump travel, and he shared it with the Jade Falcons. His motives for doing so were legion, but it included clan legitimacy as to who could form the Ilclan after the conquest of Terra, as well as ensuring that there was an overwhelming military force that would crush the Republic's defenders. Malvina uplifted everyone she possibly could, who ranked as loyal and reliable from the entirety of the massed Jade Falcon occupation zone. She burned through every possible territory they'd captured for more resources in order to build up the Jade Falcons to this point. And now, she would burn through the entirety of her followers to achieve her goal of seizing the homeworld of mankind. But this encounter had something else significant in it, strangely. The Marauder IIC had largely vanished from the inventories of Clan Wolf over the last century, and they had discarded it as a design within their production facilities since departing the clan Homeworlds at a very minimum. It was old. It wasn't worth their while. Of all of the clans, the wolves seemed to turn over their designs the most frequently. They'd built the Timberwolf, and then proceeded to relegate their advanced clan Marauder to the second line. After the invasion, they repeatedly attempted to discard the Timberwolf as well, but found its niche too important, and inevitably, reluctantly even, they began producing it again in the 32nd century, after the Warwolf proved to not be up to the task of replacing it. Now though, in the battle for Terra, the Jade Falcons had not only adopted the mech as one of their cornerstones in second-line formations, which would participate in the battle for the most significant system in all of the Inner Sphere, but they would turn it upon its creators as a dagger to their throats. This would not only be a battle to settle who was the greatest clan of all, but one pitting completely different clan tactics against one another, all while the Republic of the Sphere was caught in the middle of the conflagration. Ironically, the Republic, truly the third actor in the battle that was to come, would bring the Marauder IICs to the field of battle themselves, in order to defend Terra, as they had received them through trade with the Rasalhague Dominion, their nominal ally and partner, a force that did not show up to invade Terra despite invitation, but also did not show up to protect them. The Falcon assault on the Sol system was to be nothing less than ferocious. Prior to the Falcons making their landing, the Wolves had already struck first, devastating the Republic, who were somehow caught seemingly utterly unprepared for what was happening. The Republic considered its poor faring early on against Alaric and his wolves to be actually a boon, if only because they believed they could attrit his forces away. The reality changed sharply when the Jade Falcons arrived on world. Malvina Hazen and her Jade Falcons landed with 4 galaxies on Terra, with more held in reserve to be clear. This was the beginning of Operation Birthright, the Falcon plan to take the world. Hazen realized Alaric intended to win the planet through holding as much territory as possible, while also destroying the Republic's forces, in order to assert his claim that Clan Wolf were the rightful holders of the planet. The RAF had hoped that the Falcons and Wolves would turn upon one another after both powers landed on world, but this did not end up happening. The RAF even petitioned Alaric for a ceasefire, until the Falcons had been repulsed from the planet, hoping on cornering their enemies into fighting one another. The response the Republic and Devlin Stone received, more or less, was a death knell. I did not come to Terra to negotiate. I came to conquer. The reality was, the Falcons were avoiding a multi-front campaign from the start. Malvina believed Alaric's forces were too weak to take Terra alone, which was why he'd invited her in the first place. She believed that Alaric had intended to simply use the Jade Falcons to claim the Ilclan ship for himself. Instead, if they focused on the Republic first, they could sort out the final trial of possession between one another. She directed her forces as much as possible to fight around this reality. The campaign on planet involved every force that could be brought to bear by the Falcons after this point. While the quality of galaxies varied, the Falcons functionally had no second-line forces, in that every scrap had to be used for frontline operations. Mighty battle mechs like the Marauder IIC plowed into Republic lines in what started as the battle for the European continent. This was a battle that would drag out for longer than the Falcons expected, but they no less savaged their Republic enemies all the same. Still, they expanded their theater of operations by landing new forces in North Africa and the Middle East, once more expressly targeting the Republic defenders. From here they launched into South America next. Eventually, even North America fell too. The main holdout against them throughout this had been Geneva. Its holding out resulted in Malvina reacting harshly across the planet, killing countless people needlessly. It was only then that the serious fighting between clans Wolf and Jade Falcon began as the Wolves made inroads into adjacent territories to the Falcons. These bitterest of enemies would begin their final battle, and with the Falcons unleashing their own horrors upon the wolves, as well as their own ancient creations. The war across the whole of Terra accelerated as pieces were continuously now carved up between the occupying powers, as the Republic whittled away as its forces were reduced. The desperate diplomacy, chaos, and violence eventually culminated in the capitulation of the Republic, as well as setting up one final battle. In the eastern reaches of Canada, north of Lake Superior, the final clash came about. Artillery, cauldrons of fire, and legions of battlemechs clashed. But there was to be only one victor, and it was not Clan Jade Falcon. Sabotaged before the battle even began, outnumbered severely, and having to face new combatants, Alaric's reserves of Wolf Dragoons and his galaxy of wolves in exile, as well as the full tumen of the wolves arrayed against them, was simply too much for the Jade Falcon war machine. Their bird mechs were shattered. The Mongol doctrine was finally put to rest outside of Clan Hell's horses, and the Marauder IIC, a mech which had been sent forth to serve its new masters against its creators, was shattered along with everything else. In the aftermath, Malvina was killed by her pet Cynthia, after full concessions and recognitions were made. Alaric Ward was declared Ilclan of the Ilclan, and Clan Jade Falcon was left broken. Barely a whisper of the clan remained. And that whisper was commanded by one Stephanie Chistu, who now is dependent upon her wolf overlords to even survive. But on Sudaten, separated from the overwhelming majority of the now dead clan, something still stood, and true falcons still stirred in its roost. On this world, marauders still stalked from factory lines into the waiting arms of new pilots, of a new kind of Jade Falcon. A battle was lost, a war was ended, and a new war has begun. In some world, the Marauder IIC would have quietly gone into the night along with its flawed masters, or perhaps would have even fallen back into the hands of Clan Wolf, or into the hands of the Lyran Commonwealth, or another nearby power like the Hell's Horses. But that world did not come to pass. Instead, the remnant of Clan Jade Falcon that still stirs has been left in inheritance by their monstrous predecessors, and one that will be strong enough to anchor their forces, as well as to guarantee their survival in the chaos that now surrounds them in what is known as the vacuum of the hinterlands. In due time, those that struck down its masters before may yet feel the wrath of the sword they forged centuries ago, for not all falcons have been tamed. The final configuration of the Marauder IIC, assembled specifically by and for Clan Jade Falcon in 3140, the Marauder IIC-10 is without a doubt one of the most terrifying battlemechs in the 85-ton weight bracket to ever walk the battlefield. Leaning into the same battle tactics and design philosophy as their bird-themed mechs, this 2C radically reimagines the mech's role on the battlefield. To start with, it has its traditional endo-steel internal structure. After this, it has 20 double heat sinks, letting it suppress its heat total by 40 per turn. And it'll definitely need every one of those sinks. It runs a standard gyro and cockpit as well, and has 13 tons of standard plating, giving it slightly less protection than the base model. The major changes come from its 340 XL engine, which gives the mech a maximum speed of 64 kilometers per hour. This extra light engine of course weighs less, just like in other models, and makes the mech remotely more vulnerable. And just like the Marauder IIC-6, The 10 can leap up to 180 meters using improved jump jets, giving it a massive ability to defend itself and to exploit enemy positions, regardless of terrain conditions. And these features pair exceptionally well with its weapon systems, which are drawn from the most infamous of categories. The Marauder IIC has a pair of clan large pulse lasers, and these are split between its two arms. These are then followed by a pair of clan medium pulse lasers, doing exactly the same. These are extremely accurate and can deal consistent damage turn on turn, especially if the mech leaps from cover to cover. These will erode targets if they are caught out of position by the leaping monster that holds them. But the pain doesn't stop there, because in its torso it has twin small pulse lasers to back these up in close, which are found in the right and left torso. Not only are these accurate, despite having a short range, they are superb with dealing with infantry-sized targets. In its center torso, there are 2 ER small lasers as a final backup, as far as lesser weapons are concerned. However, there is one nasty surprise left still on board, in the form of its left torso-mounted Clantech ER PPC. This is, of course, a head clipper and a major hole puncher, and it sits within the torso, ready to be used whenever the mech isn't jumping. The Marauder IIC is most certainly one of the deadliest mechs to appear in the late Dark Age, and despite lacking the wings of some of its stablemates, it is an agile, heavily gunned hunter that will burn holes in targets with its pulse lasers, or blast holes in them with its ERPPC. It has the heatsink capacity to cycle its weapons responsibly as well. It takes the Marauder to places where it rarely has gone before, and delivers masterfully to any pilot brave enough to push it the way it was intended to be. The Marauder IIC is the ultimate evolution of the Jade Falcon's approach to design, implemented in an older chassis. It is the reason why it is the ultimate Marauder. You become strong by defying defeat, and by turning loss and failure into success. Napoleon Bonaparte. There's something beautiful about the cycle of how battle mechs are designed, built, deployed, discarded, and eventually repurposed. Of course, it is less than beautiful for the people involved in the fighting and dying around deployments, but that is neither here nor there. The Marauder IIC was created, in and of itself, in this process. Clan Wolf, the eventual Ilclan, first among the clans, looked upon the Marauder, a tried and tested design from the Star League, a favorite from the gunslingers who famously achieved immense notoriety, as well as it being the mech their first Khan rode into battle against the Amara's Empire with, and decided to do something new and grand with it. Before the advent of this mech, nothing like it had been done in clan space. Configurations existed, surely, but not something as radical as a second-generation, multi-ton variants of an old design. The mech became universally sought after and adopted by the other clans within years of its arrival, simply because of how powerful it was proven to be. But as all things do, it rose to prominence and fell, just as the Marauder fell out of use before it. The Omnimech dominated clan military thinking until just prior to the Wars of Reaving, and it was only natural that this Goliath of a mech would climb from the pit it had been casually discarded into when that happened. The return was more than simply the resurrection of its original configuration to some kind of use and prominence, however. It was the restoration of the thinking around the mech. The Rasalhague Dominion and Clan Jade Falcon not only began making this mech for themselves, they began to evolve it into new forms, taking on new responsibilities with new configurations, thrusting it back into the human-wide arms race that the Inner Sphere had been locked into for over a century now. What is beautiful about it, much like many second-line mechs of the clans, is that it has been given an opportunity, and shows that which has been discarded can not only be made usable again, but it can flourish. Within the clans, might makes right. The fact that this mech has returned, indeed, even into frontline service, alone, is telling as its true value. And to the warriors who pilot it, it is an admission, in a way, to its true beauty. The Marauder IIC is mech evolution in almost all of its forms. And perhaps one day, those who build the Marauder IIC now will show those who created it originally just how stunning and dangerous its evolution has become the next time things go around. Whoever first said, "Might does not make right," obviously was on the losing side. Con Jerome Winson, leader of Clan Wolf, 2825. First of all, I want to thank you all for joining me here today. This project took a few weeks longer than I had originally intended. There was just a lot going on in life. But we made it. We did it! Fun fact, I actively prevented this project from ballooning into some 4-hour monstrosity this time, just because a lot of the other subjects I might have been able to attach to it, I want to see them in other places. So things like a major ghost bear portion of this wasn't really glued in. I also felt the back half of the script needed to be cleaned up a bit more, but at a certain point, things gotta get made. You have to go to war with the army you have, not the one you don't. So, if you enjoyed this content though, please consider hitting like and leaving a comment. It's hugely helpful, I can assure you. If this is in the first week of the video's launch too, please consider hyping it as well, so YouTube is aware that this channel is not dead. Also, if you're new here, why not subscribe? I post videos like this as often as I can, but as you can tell based on the duration, it can take a little while sometimes. Back to the production end of things real quick. I did my best with what I could find around the people who built this thing, and the mechs entries as well. Full resources will be found in the top pinned post. I also found out that this thing started walking off of Wolfsite 2 on Stronamecti because I asked one of the fact-check freelancers who works for Catalyst Game Labs, Alex Knight, when I was doing the preliminaries for this one. He pointed me in the right direction, so a huge shout out to him as well. To get into the credit side of things, there were 2 pieces of art made for this video. One was done by Alan Blackwell, which depicts a marauder in a swamp, which was something that had been in my mind for like years, and he brought it to life spectacularly. I nicknamed this piece, by the way, Crocodile, because that was the inspiration for it. The other is showing off a Marauder IIC in its hangar, and that was done by Jaden Morris, who knocked it out of the park. Both Alan and Jaden have contributed to the channel before, and I appreciate their brilliant work. To get to the gameplay footage of the Marauder IIC, we used a mod by Art of Battletech for Mechwarrior 5 Mercenaries that adds its classic look into the game. People should check it out, as he has an assortment of other classic mechs he's imported over the years too. Also a massive thank you to everyone who helped me capture gameplay footage as well in this video. It was hugely helpful. And as we get to near the end here, I want to thank all of the YouTube channel members who make this possible. I could not do this without you guys. I pour weeks of work into every video like this, and without your support, I really couldn't. So I really do mean it when I say that this content is only made possible because of viewers like you. Of the channel members though, there are 15 who are ranked as Captain Generals. And because some spectacular artwork was made for the video, I would like to personally thank beyond that Thomas Craker, Bronzite, Manakoa, Rye Fields, Captain General Conk, the grandest of potatoes, Impulse Envor, Adherent of Lady Columbia, Waxatron, Iron Darkness, Robert St. John, Telos, Earthquake Johnson, and Kaylee. Thank you. So with all of that said, what did you like the most about the Marauder IIC video? Which was your favorite variant of the Marauder IIC that's been produced to date? Was I too sarcastic about Clan Wolf? Did I do Malvina dirty? Did Clan Staradder do nothing wrong? Let me know in the comment section below, and I'll catch you all there.